Well, good morning, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We're a few minutes late. Welcome. Glad everybody's here. And I'm sure we'll have a few more stragglers coming in this morning. My name is Lisa Blazer. I'm actually currently the chair of this advisory committee. So I'm on behalf of myself and the coordinating board, welcome to, I don't know, is this our first meeting of the year, technically speaking, sort of? And we started in September. So welcome. And in a few minutes, we're going to do introductions and get to know everybody. We have a lot of guests here this morning, including, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward with the new committee members. I know we have several folks that have been, their names have been presented to serve on this next committee. So at this time, I think I'm going to have everybody just kind of go around the room and just say who you are and where you're from, and that way we know who everybody is. Is that okay? And I will tell you, there's coffee and pastries over there. If you haven't been here before, the restrooms, you can either go out this door or back there. They're just right over here. So we'll take breaks periodically, and we'll kind of gauge where we're at before we get close to the lunch hour, and if we feel like we can power through it, we will. So we'll see where we're at on the agenda. Is that fair enough with everybody? Yeah, so people can catch flights and get out in the rain again and drive home. Some of us, okay. Okay, so do you want to start, Lisa?
Sure. I'm Lisa Mahler. I'm serving as an interim as Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Financial Aid Programs.
And I'm George Torres. I'm with Texas Guaranteed Student Loan Corporation.
I'm Anna Drake. I'm a student rep from UT Austin, PhD program in higher ed.
My name is Tom Malecki. I work at the University of Texas at Austin.
My name is Ann Walker. I'm Director of Financial Aid at Rice University in Houston.
I'm Selma De Leon, University of North Texas.
I'm Carolyn Mallory from University in Houston, Victoria.
They need a mic. They need a mic.
Jeff Webster, TG. I love microphones. Christopher Murr, Financial Aid and Scholarships at Texas State University.
Linda Battles, Deputy Commissioner here at the Coordinating Board.
Hi, I'm Ginger Gossman. I'm also with the Coordinating Board, and I'm the newly minted Senior Director of Innovation and Policy Development.
Good morning. Ray Martinez with the Independent Colleges and Universities of Texas.
Good morning. I'm David Young with the Governor's Office.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Audrey Hernandez, the Regional Director with the College Advising Corps.
I'm Albert Contreras with the Loan Program here at the Coordinating Board.
Mayor Montez, Director of Loan Program Operations.
Michelle Williams with the Loan Programs here at the Coordinating Board.
Okay, you guys.
We listen.
Yeah. Connie Cooper with the Coordinating Board.
Catherine Carson with the Coordinating Board.
I'm Jane Caldwell with the Coordinating Board, and I'm mainly here just to say hi and goodbye. I was on the committee for many years, and have recently acquired a new position here at the Coordinating Board. I'm terribly excited about the new position and everything, but the hardest part is just saying goodbye to all the connections with the financial aid community. So I'm looking for opportunities in the new position to find ways to reach out to you guys. So hopefully we'll find opportunities to work together in the future. But I wish you well, and thank you for many years of good camaraderie and hard work and success with very important programs and kids. So it was an honor to work with you, and I hope to do more so in the future.
Jane, tell them what you're doing.
My new title is Director of Student Support. I'm in the College of Student Readiness and Success. Upstairs used to be the P16 division. And I'm working, my main things that I'm getting into at the beginning are the Apply Texas program that help high school students apply for admission to institutions in Texas. And a part of that is the counselor suite that allows high school counselors access to progress reports about their students in completing the FAFSA. So the idea is to help the counselors help their students as much as possible acquire the resources for going on to college. There are other things on the job description, but I haven't gotten to any of them yet, so I'll fill you in later as I figure out what they are. But again, thank you for many years of good work together, and I hope it works out for many more in the future. Thank you.
Well, Jane, we're going to miss you, and we are so thankful for all the work that you've done with the committee and working with you. So let's give Jane, and congratulations on the position. We're going to miss her cookies. So
she offered.
Okay, so just to give you an idea how we're going to structure the meeting this morning, we have some agenda items. You should have a packet of information, and we'll work through those. This is a lot about dialogue. The folks that are up here at the table at this point are the voting members of the advisory committee, so there may be some particular items that we'll need to vote on. As a guest, we do want you to participate as well. We just ask that you step to a microphone to talk, and members of the advisory committee, please make sure you turn on your microphone when you get ready to ask a question or talk, just so we can make sure we get everything recorded and everybody can hear. So please feel free to participate, ask questions. That's what we're here. Yes, sir.
Oh, I apologize. If anybody in the audience out there has any questions they'd like to ask while they're outside the agency during the meeting, we have the email address that they can submit their question to. It is fameding@thecb.state.tx.us.
Great. So we do occasionally get questions from folks that are listening in on our meeting as well. So please participate. This is an open dialogue, a chance for us to really provide some feedback to the coordinating board, talk through some of the issues. We're getting ready to head into a legislative session in less than a month, so we want to be ready for that and make sure that our voice is being heard and that we can provide some kind of impact to what we're trying to do here in the state with financial aid. So that's how we'll roll for this meeting. And I'm going to turn over to Lisa. You've got the first agenda item, right?
Well,
this discussion of the selection. It says Lisa.
Okay. I would just like to say the process went really well. We reached out we invited presidents and chancellors to, I think that was in October, to make recommendations for new members. We have members members terms are expiring, and the group had decided it would be a good idea to expand a bit. I think the total number allowed is 24, and with the recommendations upon final approval by the board, I believe the total number will be 20. If my count was right. The process did not involve coordinating board staff. Once those recommendations were received, we conveyed that information to Lisa, who shared it with other members and developed a ranking process and submitted final recommendations to us in a very short turnaround, which we appreciated. Our board the CAP committee, the Committee on Accountability and Planning, yesterday approved recommending those final candidates to the board, and final approval is anticipated at the January board meeting. So that's pretty much it.
Well, and I'd like to microphone. See, I'm not following the rules. I'd like to recognize those that are here that are going to actually start serving on the committee: Carolyn Mallory, and Mary Gallegos Adams, Carl Gordon, Audrey Hernandez, right, and kind of wave, Chris Murr, which we got to get his name spelled right too. It's M-U-R-R on the list. And did I get everybody that's here? Other folks couldn't make it on, it was a little bit short notice, but officially we'll have, I think, our next meeting in February. You guys will be up here and serve on the advisory committee for the remainder of your term. So we're glad that you're here. Thanks for making the trek out today, and please participate in the discussion. So thank you very much.
And I would like to add that I think, considering the process, I think we have really good representation, not only among the sectors, but also regionally, geographically.
Yeah.
It worked out really well.
We had a lot of great candidates in the pool, so it was a matter of just looking at trying to get that broad representation. So thank you for being willing to serve, and thanks for being here. Okay. One of the other things, the discussion for the rule changes for member services, it kind of goes hand in hand with this whole process of selecting people as they rotate on and off the committee. And so it seems a bit late, and I think that's where we realized that when we had the September meeting, that we because of the way the process has to work with the recommendations to the committee here and then on to the board in January, really starting the whole year. My question was, why doesn't the year coincide with the actual fiscal year of the coordinating board? Everything seems to start in September, right? For those of you that have been here a while, everything seems to start in September. So I was asking those questions at the last meeting. Can we really look at those dates and figure out how we could start this process a little sooner? So I'm hoping that it would just be rule changes that we would need to look at, right, to change the dates, or do we have to do anything with that?
Honestly, I'm not seeing anything in rule about
when it starts,
but it may be.
I don't remember seeing anything either. That's why I think I was asking the question at the last meeting. So what I wanted to present to the committee is the challenging part. You're going to have that transition time. So the one thing that will happen is the transition. Some people's terms might get cut a little short because of that, but hopefully that won't be a big deal. We're really talking about one meeting. The idea would be, if we want the new committee members to start at the beginning of the year, first of all, we have to decide what's the beginning of the year. Because right now, the way it works is the first meeting would be in December, right? Do we have it in there?
The end of the first committee meeting.
Okay, that's what we have in the rules. So that's, we would get, if we wanted to change that, we would need to change that. All right? Okay. So the way the rules state, it says the transition of leadership to the new presiding officer will occur at the end of the first committee meeting of each state fiscal year. That would be September. The new presiding officer's term will begin with the second committee meeting of each year, which is December, as will each year of committee members' terms. So basically, everybody's term would start in December. So one of the things that was a challenge this year, we didn't pay attention to that as well as we should have, because really what should have happened with the recommended members is we should have done, if we were going to even go with this schedule, we should have started that process even earlier so that we could get the earlier board meeting, get everybody in place by December. So we could stick with that and stick with what's in the rules right now with, the new chair. So Tom, as the vice chair, we would turn the meeting over to him at the end of the September meeting next year, right?
I heard the vice, but not the chair part.
What?
Anyway, no, never mind.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. And Tom's funny, in case you didn't know. And so, so Tom would then take over at the end of the September meeting, and then officially the new members could start in December. We would just have to move the process of making recommendations much earlier. Which board meeting would we need? When would we need to have that? If we stuck with the same schedule, when would we need to have that? Board is in October, isn't it? Isn't there a board meeting in October? So everything, we would need to do that probably in late summer. We would need to know who those recommendations are probably by our September meeting so they could meet, or somewhere around that time frame, right?
The board does meet in October,
right.
And the approval needs to happen at the committee meeting. I mean, there's preliminary,
right?
The meeting of the CAP committee, which, I don't have the schedule in my head right now.
But it's probably pretty close to that, right? Is it September maybe? I think it was right around the same time we were meeting last time, if memory serves.
I'll look into that.
So if we were to stick with the same schedule that's in the rules right now, we would just need to move up the process for the recommendations so that new members would be in place by the time the December meeting. So basically, everybody rolling off their term that ends with this fiscal year would come to the September meeting. End of the September meeting gets turned over to Tom. Folks that were here, like we did this last time, rotated off. But then the December meeting, everybody would be in place for the new year. So that's the first option, and we wouldn't have to change any rules. We just would need to make the process of recommendations earlier. The second option would be that the new year start with September, and that would change. We'd have to get the rule changed, right? That's a bit more complicated, right, to get that changed. We would need to get the rule changed to where we would need to do the recommendations much sooner, and then the new folks start at the September meeting. Any thoughts on both of those options? What you're kind of thinking would be a good way to go?
I would recommend going with option 1. That's with the least changes that we would have to make. But again, the recommendations would have to come about before September.
Right. And once we know the CAP schedule for that meeting, then we can make that determination. So, any other thoughts on that? Hey guys, say who you are and where you're from. We know you.
Carolyn Jones, Collin College.
Ron Brown, University of Mary Hardin Baylor.
Good morning.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. No
Had
worries.
a 3-car truck pile up in Round Rock. So
Oh, you know, I heard that. I heard
interstate.
that on the radio on my way
Yeah.
in. Okay. Yikes. Any other thoughts on that?
I'll get you those.
Okay, that's cool. So if I'm asking the committee, do we want to stick with option 1? It does have the least amount of changes that we would have to make, so we would go with option 1. September is the last meeting that the folks that are rotating off would be on. That's when we turn it over to Tom. We would just have to move the recommendations up sooner so that new members could actually start in December. Do we want to, so anybody want to make a recommendation? Make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, so Zelma made a motion. I'm sorry, who seconded? Carolyn? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, then that carried. Oh, yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to give you the date for the
awesome.
meeting is September 23rd, 2015.
Okay, so we could even do that if our meeting is early in September. If we've got all the we could actually vote on those members at the September meeting, get it to the CAP for the CAP meeting, and we'd be good to go. So our goal is to have all the nominees ready to go by the September meeting, because we'll probably do that. Didn't we meet like the first or second week of September, I think? Okay. So as long as it's before September 23rd of 2015, I think we'll be good. Yes, ma'am.
It actually has to be 2 weeks before September 23rd because we send all the materials to the board members 2 weeks in advance.
So our date needs to be at least 2 weeks before so we can send the materials. Right? We could do that. That could still work, right? Okay. Well, we'll work through that. If we have to do it via email like we did this last time, we will. That's not a big deal. Okay. So I think we got a plan.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. Number 3 down. All right. Okay, so our next agenda item is, we need to approve the minutes? Okay, sorry. That's not on my list, so I totally didn't pay attention. You got to give me a list, Connie, just so you know. Okay. Okay, Connie sent out I'm sorry, we missed something that we need to approve. We have the minutes from the last meeting. Are there any discussion items from that or any corrections that need to be made to the meeting notes? Zelma?
Yes, on page 3, under exceptional items request, I just need a clarification on that first sentence that says the CB has 24 exceptional items request and its LBB totaling almost $300.
That doesn't sound right.
Should that be more than $300?
300 million. It's 300 million.
Yes.
Okay.
And Carolyn mentioned that, and I've corrected the meeting notes.
Okay.
And I can send out all of the corrections to y'all again, if that would be appropriate.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or concerns about the minutes? Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended? Second? And Ron's going to second. Any other discussion? Okay, we've got a motion, we've got a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries, we're done. Thank you, Connie. Okay. So now we have a discussion of the Beyond Time Loan Counseling module. Lisa?
Y'all may recall that I believe it was at the spring meeting we introduced the requirement from Senate Bill 215 for Beyond Time loan counseling and talked about, the logistics of it just a bit. And TG was really great in working with us and developing this module that we demonstrated at the September meeting. With the idea at the time being that the student would go through the counseling module and print a completion certificate that would have to be delivered to the financial aid office to be maintained there. And it was at that time that everybody sort of woke up to the idea that this isn't going to work real well and may not be particularly useful in an audit to demonstrate that you've complied. So I'm really pleased that under the circumstances, we're about to migrate to a whole new loan system. We've sort of frozen all programming requests, but we had this one very narrow window of time that our IT folks got with the TG IT people and really worked quickly and worked very well together to come up with a plan and a method of delivering what I think will ultimately be what you need. It may not be as slick as we would like for it to be, and certainly down the road we could look at improvements. But I think, Janie, you're going to be walking them through this. But the idea is that the student the institution has identified this student to receive a Beyond Time loan. The student will register on the coordinating board's website. He or she has to do that anyway. Then will be directed to the TG online counseling module. We'll go through the module, and a completion will be registered that will be returned to the coordinating board. I hope I'm saying this right. Janie or Albert, correct me if I'm wrong. And then the coordinating board will maintain reports that the institutions can go to, like they get all of their reports, and to verify that the student has done the counseling module. So are you ready, Janie, to kind of walk them through what it looks like? You're not going to go through the whole module.
We had a little problem with getting the PowerPoint, but I think we're ready.
The whole idea is that the institution doesn't have to maintain all this paper, and we have real proof that the student has done the counseling. Right.
Right. So if you remember the original counseling module allowed the student to complete a certificate of completion, and the student had to just enter their name. Based on the last meeting that we had, there was additional functionality that was asked. So what we did is we made some changes to the certificate. If you could, next slide. Okay, so instead of the student entering their name and then just printing out the document, we're now asking the student to register that they've completed the module. So the student will see this slide, and then they will select at the very bottom where it says Beyond Time Loan Program Counseling Module Registration. They will select that, and that will bring them back to our site, where we will ask them some information: their first name, last name, date of birth, email, and student ID and the school. When they enter that information, then the system allows them to print out a certificate. This is just for the student's record. What we do from the information from the previous page, we record that and we capture it, and then the schools have access to a report. Next slide. So the schools will be able to log in, and on the menu under reports, they will be able to go into the bot counseling report, and this is the information that you'll be able to see. It's in Excel. There's not any additional functionality, but you can copy it onto your school site, and then you'll be able to query or use that information as you need. The way it's captured is the most recent student is at the top of the report. So it's pretty simple. If you're not going, or if you can't find it, just give us a call and we'll walk you through the process. But it's pretty simple. Right now, it's out there. We've got about 150 students that have already registered. So that's pretty good. Questions, concerns?
Okay, maybe I didn't hear. Is it a cumulative report then? So every time
Yes.
we go out to the report, it's
Yes.
going to have all the students that
Yes, it'll be
previously did it
cumulative.
as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay.
And what's the student ID that's being used?
It's whatever the student provides. We ask them before they register that they'll need their student ID and the school in order to complete the registration. So hopefully by this time, you've already let the student know that they need to go out there and do this counseling module, and they'll have that information available to complete the registration.
Thank you.
Any other questions about?
I have an observation from one of our staff members. Our universities, we had 3, and they're not all together in the drop-down box when the student chooses a name. So we were wondering if you could review that and see if they can all be right next to each other.
They're alphabetical.
Oh, in the drop-down box for the
Yes, in
student?
the drop-down box for the student.
Okay, we'll take a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
I want to say I appreciate the fact that you guys went back. And this is actually, for those of you that are guests, and this is actually a direct result of discussion that we had about the new module and the new requirement for some of us to have to go in and do entrance counseling for the Beyond Time student loan, the original proposal. And it was an effort to try to get something out there so that we were ready to go. Would have had a lot more paper. It didn't seem to be, and we would have been dealing with pieces of paper, and several of us, as you can well imagine, voiced our concerns about that. And so this is a direct result of a discussion that we had in one of these meetings. So it's great because it's a chance for us this is that impact that we have, and we can provide feedback to something that was needed, right? And so I really appreciate the coordinating board and TG working through this to make it work to where we can have a report. Our next phase then can be something that we can download that goes right into Banner, right? Yeah, just saying. But that's something that we can, huh? Yeah, we'll work through some of those other issues, but this is a great start for a new requirement that we have, and from my perspective, I think all Beyond Time students should have to go through entrance counseling anyway. So, but that's obviously for some institutions that's a choice. For some of us, it's not, and we'll work through that. So, thank you for that effort. I really appreciate that. Any other questions or comments or anything you want to say about Beyond Time?
Now, just echoing what Lisa said, thank you for the improvements.
Okay, well, there you go. Item number 4, checked off. All right, thank you. Okay, and I had asked, we are heading into the next legislative session in January, and a couple of meetings ago, we did have a presentation. I believe it's in the packet of materials, and you're seeing it up on the screen. The recommendations for the 84th Texas Legislature. This is actually what the coordinating board will be. This is their priorities, right? Am I saying that the right way? These are the priorities of the coordinating board, what they're going to be working on, and then I just wanted to make sure and hear from everybody if there's any other items that we need to, we feel that are important to address based on what you're hearing out there right now from your own legislative committees on campus. I know I'm already receiving requests to write responses on behalf of UTSA for any kind of bills that are being proposed, and those will start coming in they'll come in a lot more as we get into January. We'll get a lot more of those. So one of the things that I wanted to just have an opportunity to talk about any issues that we might think are important, and it may not be that the coordinating board can, because they've already set their priorities, but it might be something that we as a financial aid community need to bring forth, and we need to meet with some of the legislators and their staff to potentially be heard at a hearing, right? So that's something that we can do as a community. Ann is here representing TASFA. TASFA is a great partner in this, to where if we feel like we need to be at the legislative hearings for any particular financial aid topic, we can make sure we try to get on the agenda. We have contacts at a lot of the offices, and they want to hear from us. So I think this is an opportunity for us to talk through some areas that we might think are a concern that we've either heard through the grapevine or that we want to be heard. So that's what this particular section is about as we head into this legislative session. I know I have one, but I'll let somebody else go first if you want to. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering if the coordinating board staff's been able to take a look at some of the legislation that's been pre-filed. Of course, we know there's a bill to freeze tuition at current rates and essentially do away with designated tuition. But if I remember correctly, there's also a bill that would cut back on the designated tuition set aside at public institutions from 20% to 15%. And have you folks had a chance to, or has anybody from the legislature had a dialogue with you folks on that?
I would just say that any bills that have been filed have been logged into our legislative tracking system and assigned out. I have not personally seen a bill about cutting back on tuition set-asides. I'm not sure that's happened. Maybe you've heard about it or something, but
I noticed it the other day.
Are you familiar with it, Linda?
Texas Legislature Online website.
So it's been assigned to the appropriate staff person, but I don't think any of those people are here. Also, I heard there was a tuition revenue bond bill filed, and that would be going to a whole different
I got you,
group.
Chris. I know you're next. Okay, Chris?
Thank you.
I was just going to comment on what Tom was saying, and that is, I think it's House Bill 117 that's been filed, and it's not only reducing set-aside, but also using those funds to cover the expenses of the Hazelwood program. So I think as a community, it would behoove us to stress the benefit that those set-aside programs have for existing high-need populations, and that maybe Hazelwood should be funded through other sources than really taking those set-aside funds from our needy students.
There's discussion at every legislative session about the set-asides, and it is an important thing. And did I see articles from, I can't remember who I got an article from, because there are a lot of discussions about, what should happen if the designated tuition, if the set-aside goes from 20% down to 15%, then that is an impact, because technically speaking, then if 5% still has to go to the Beyond Time program, that leaves us with only 10% for the tuition set aside. So for those of us that are at public institutions, that may be a topic that if it comes up, if it rears its head again about the designated set aside, where we may want to provide some really good data on the benefit, the number of students that are receiving financial aid from the set-asides, what kind of impact that has on the institutions in the state. So that may be something that we definitely want to have a conversation about and get in on some hearings with that. And I do know that, I know that the new governor is talking about, and I don't know if we want to say that with the Hazelwood is another big topic about getting some funding for Hazelwood, because that is an unfunded program that many of us, I know at UTSA, it's around $11 million a year. And it's a great benefit for our veterans, which is great, but we also have to look at what kind of impact does that have on revenue, and what could we do to help support the institutions that are funding that particular program. So I know that that's something that's being discussed as well. Any thoughts on that particular topic? Is that a topic that we want to discuss as we move forward, to be prepared on? What kind of things do you feel like we need to share with the legislature if such a bill were to move forward? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Tom. Thank you. No, go. No, I was just going to fill, so go.
Well, I think there may be some value in sharing some numbers, and although I would imagine the coordinating board would be able to do this too, of the numbers of students served through the programs that might be have some funding reduced in order to help shore up the funding for the Hazelwood program. And I know, and I appreciate, and I actually very much approve of the state's priority for helping veterans do what they can once they get out of the service and such. But certainly trying to look at those with what sort of the state's master plan for higher education is, I'm not sure that group is big enough or will be big enough in the future to help achieve all the goals, and there might be some value in talking about that.
I do think it's important that we try to figure out what kind of data would help support the need for those tuition set-asides and why they're so important. So we're probably going to rely on the coordinating board since you have the entire state, all the public institutions, but I also think it would be really great for institutions to start thinking about what kind of stories and that we could share about the students that it's serving. So, because it is an important thing for the public institutions. So to be honest, I mean, I'm not being self-serving in any way, but it is the public institution. Oh, there's light. The public institutions, it would be of great loss of money for students that we've been serving for several years. So we want to make sure that we still have those opportunities to do that for our students. So that's definitely something that we need to bring forth.
Well, of course, with any bill analysis that the coordinating board staff does, it includes, not only the fiscal impact, but the number of students affected. So that would be part of the bill analysis.
Any other thoughts on that topic? Okay, thank you. Can we check and make sure that the email is actually working? Okay. Okay. Great. Marcus is a member of the committee. He's online and voting as well. So good. We got the email working. Yay. All right. One of the topics that I had brought up, I think at the last meeting or whatever meeting that we did this presentation, I do feel like we might want to look at what's happening with Be On Time. My main concerns with the Be On Time is that the appropriations process, because what happens with the Be On Time is that enough money, basically the public institutions are putting a portion of money into the Be On Time. That's 5% of those set-asides are going into the Be On Time student loan program. But there wasn't enough money appropriated that met that total amount that we were contributing to the Be On Time student loan program. So for example, at UTSA, we're receiving about $900,000 less than what we contributed to the program. So the money, the tuition set-asides from the students that are going into the program are not coming back to the institution in the form of Be On Time student loans. And I know that we've had lots of challenges with the Be On Time student loan, getting students to take that out. And I know there's some issues where some schools may not be using all of their allocation every year. But as we move forward, I think that there's more interest in the Be On Time student loans. It's something that the high school counselors, and Audrey, this may be a topic as you guys look at getting students interested in the Be On Time to ask for it, because they have to ask for it from our institutions. We can't automatically package it, but it's still a very valuable tool for our students, and we can't grow the program if we can't put all the money that we're contributing as a public institution, and I don't know about the other portion of it for private, so someone else will need to talk about that particular piece of it. But we're at a point now at UTSA where we can spend all of our money, but we're receiving less than what we contribute. And then based on the discussions that we had before, I believe there's approximately $120 million that's sitting there untapped from previous years where the program was struggling, and it's just there. So we can't touch that as well. That's my understanding, is that we can't touch that $120 million. And we also have the dynamic of not the full amount that's being put into the set-asides is not being appropriated for the public institutions for Beyond Time. That's an issue, and I think there are some institutions that could use that money. We've just struggled so much with the Beyond Time. First, we had the program, we were getting it up and running. Then we couldn't give it out to new students, so we went through several years where we were only giving it to renewal. For an institution like UTSA, early on, it was students didn't meet the renewal requirements. Well, now they're starting to meet those renewal requirements, so I need more money for renewals, and there's not enough money to give it out to more new students. High school counselors are talking about it, telling students, ask for it, and then we don't have money. So we've got some changing dynamics going on, so I think there needs to be a bigger effort. I know I've already talked with my legislative staff on campus that that's going to be a topic that perhaps we need to address as an institution. Losing $900,000 is a pretty significant chunk of change, and I'm not the biggest school. So
one thing to keep in mind that hasn't been in place all that long. I can't remember when the rule was adopted, but next spring in March, is it what day in March? I can't remember, but. There will be a reallocation of funds for so that the institutions that aren't using the money.
We can get right, and I appreciate that, but it's still limited to the appropriation.
Right.
So there's still a limit to what we can get back from what we contribute to the program. So I appreciate that, because then if we do have institutions, and then maybe that will provide us some data for who's really using the Beyond Time, how it needs to be used, and look at the allocation process a little bit differently, and I know it's our proportion that we're getting, but if the total is less, then our proportion is less. Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes.
Oh, you brought this up at your last meeting, and we listened loud and clear. You were very loud and clear about it, and we
sorry.
And we appreciate your feedback. So we're undergoing the strategic fiscal review. We're one of 17 state agencies going through this pilot, and as part of that fiscal review, we submitted a recommendation stating that we would want $50 million on top of the base appropriated to the coordinating board for Beyond Time in the general revenue dedicated, the tuition set aside. And that would include any tuition set asides that are collected during the 16-17 biennium, so that we at least stop or curtail the accumulation of those dollars in that $120 million that you referenced. So at least the legislature could appropriate those dollars as they were collected for the next biennium. And then also to appropriate any loan repayments that we get during the biennium. So that totals an estimate of $50 million on top of the base. So that's something that we're advocating. I was at the Texas Tribune Symposium on Friday. They had a panel there. Representative Drew Darby was on there along with Senator, I think it was the same panel, but Senator Zaffirini. Of course, Senator Zaffirini made the point that we need to stop our reliance of general revenue dedicated in balancing the budget and not appropriating those funds. And Drew Darby mentioned that would be one priority, is to try and reduce our reliance, the state's reliance on those dedicated funds for balancing the budget. So there was an effort last session to do that. In fact, they did reduce it, I think, by $1 billion, and they're going to try and continue to move in that direction. So I think there's some interest. Going back to the tuition set aside, since it's related to Beyond Time, we know that the new Lieutenant Governor, Patrick, has been very concerned for many years of tuition set-asides. So that would, I think there's going to be certainly a movement towards eliminating this set-asides. And the commissioner has can see both arguments on both sides, but he wants to be prepared to provide a recommendation to the legislature on what to do if those tuition set-asides are eliminated.
And I think one of the things, because if memory serves, and I can't remember if it was the last legislative session or the one before, there were two different discussions going on. One of them was the mandate for the 20% would be taken away, but schools could still determine that they want to use tuition dollars for financial aid, right? Which is what most institutions do. You're using tuition dollars to fund some kind of scholarship, grant, loan, work-study program, things like that. So there were two different discussions taking place. One was, if we're prohibited from using tuition dollars, that's a whole other story. If the mandatory requirement goes away, schools would still have the option to set aside funding at whatever percentage, because they have that opportunity now. The minimum is the 20%. If you want to set aside more, you can, or you can even set aside some for non-need. It doesn't have to necessarily be need-based if it's over and above that 20%. So that would also be something we want to make sure that we're clear on. If tuition set-asides were eliminated, what does that mean? Does it eliminate the mandatory requirement, or does it eliminate our opportunity to even use tuition dollars for any kind of financial aid, including scholarships? And, that's what we want to make sure that we're clear on what is being proposed out there.
I agree.
Okay.
I think what would be helpful to us is if you could give us some ideas on what would be a plan B if the legislature decides to eliminate all tuition set-asides. I think we begin with the number of students who would be impacted, obviously. Yeah. But what do we do as Plan B? And so that's sort of the task that the commissioner has given coordinating board staff here. And you'll hear later we reorganized, and we've got a new office called the Innovation and Policy Development Office. And right now we have one staff member, and we're seeking to hire 2 additional FTE to help sort of formulate these types of policy recommendations. And the idea is for those staff to work with staff across the agency on various subject matters, but also any kind of feedback from you all and other external stakeholders would be very helpful.
Thank you. Anybody have any thoughts you'd like to share or about any of these topics, the Be on Time or set-asides? Okay. Any of the private institutions want to talk? Are there any issues that you guys feel that we need to be ready for with the 84th legislature? Ann?
We were thankful that Ray Martinez from ICUT joined about 5 institutions last month. And our main concern is the Texas Equalization Grant. At this point, we have an EFC cap on that. And for many institutions who are a little bit more expensive, us, Baylor, SMU, we have students who are high need who don't look high need at a state school. So having the EFC cap means that we forego some of those dollars. And that's a concern of ours. It's hard for somebody in the legislature to look at a family with an EFC of $20,000 and feel as if they have need and are should be worthy of getting need-based aid from the state. We rely on those dollars. It's about $2.5 million at Rice. We're one of the smaller users of the TEG, so I know it's a significant portion of some schools' portfolios. The thing we wanted to emphasize is that the private universities are some of the most generous in the state of Texas. Rice covers 100% of unmet need. SMU covers 95% of unmet need. I could go on that. So it's really important for us as private institutions to know that we can spend all of the TEG dollars that are out there, and the EFC cap really limits us in that area. So we've talked to Ray. I think Ray's going to go lobby for us, I hope. But that's our biggest concern when it comes to state dollars.
Do we not use all of our TEG because of that? I'm just curious. It's been a while since I've done anything with TEG. Do we use the entire allocation, or is it certain institutions that don't use it? I'm just curious.
From what I heard from TCU, they could not use all of their TEG
because of the
funds
EFC cap?
because of the EFC cap. So they sent it back. It gets reallocated. It gets sent back, but it doesn't feel as if it's equitable across the board. And really, as a group of schools among the ICUT institutions, we really need to work together to see what is most equitable for us as a group. For schools that don't, private institutions that cannot cover 100% of unmet need, nor whose tuition price tag is as high, this is really beneficial for them. For schools at the higher end, like us, SMU, TCU, it's not so beneficial. So we need to find a way that's a little bit more equitable. And it is hard to talk to legislators and ask for money for families that really don't look needy to them because they're used to looking at students in the private sector. But if we want our students to get a world-class education, it would be really great if we could have that little bit of help. So,
is the EFC cap in statute, or is it in the, no, it's not in statute, is it?
It's what ICUT kind of put on ourselves because we were a little concerned that they'd start cutting TEG. So we're hoping there's a surplus this year. That's what we've heard, and we are hoping that it's fully funded to the levels it was in the last legislative session. I don't know, Ray, do you want to add to that?
Good morning. Ray Martinez with Independent Colleges and Universities of Texas. So I think you've articulated it well. And the EFC cap, so first of all, I've been on the job for 2 months, so excuse me if I don't have complete working knowledge of the various policies, if you will, or how this exactly works. But the EFC cap is not statutory when it comes to TEG. I know that in talking to the coordinating board staff, certainly in talking to Commissioner Paredes, there's a strong desire by the coordinating board, that by the commissioner as well, that our TEG funds are being allocated to students that demonstrate financial need and of course compelling financial need as well. So we've struggled with this, as I understand it. Again, I'm new to ICUT, but there's been some internal deliberations about how we've imposed an EFC cap and what's most equitable for all of our 38 ICUT member institutions, which vary tremendously. And so it's an issue that we'll continue to look at. But obviously from a legislative perspective, our big issue is to maintain our current, at a minimum, our current level of funding for the Texas Equalization Grant Program. We feel like there is strong support throughout the legislature for that. We appreciate the coordinating board in recommending in their LAR request that we maintain current funding for TEG, and we greatly appreciate that the coordinating board included in one of their exceptional items a request for an additional allocation of funding for TEG. I think it was $18 million to try to get us back up to levels pre-2011 so that we can serve, more TEG recipients. Right now we can serve approximately 5 out of every 10 eligible TEG recipients on our ICUT campuses. And we'd like to increase that amount, and we appreciate that the coordinating board is supportive of us seeking some additional funding.
Any other thoughts on the TEG? Any other things from the private institutions? That's your big topic, right? That's a big one. Community colleges. Anybody have anything you want to discuss? Or yes, sir.
I was just wondering, I don't know if this is on the legislative radar or not, but particularly at the community college level, we were at a meeting yesterday in Houston with a lot of area community colleges concerned with diploma mills, definitions, and homeschooling here in Texas. And it seems to be becoming an issue for Houston area community colleges, and I don't know if that is on the radar, but it's something that was definitely a heavy topic and point of concern for all of those in attendance.
What was the concern? The concern is that they exist, and what do we do about them, or what was the exact concern?
The concern it was basically that they are students are going to these diploma mills, and they are receiving their high school credentials. And since we're community colleges are open admission institutions, they'll be admitted to college. But when they go to the financial aid process, they're not, because their high school credentials don't meet the requirements.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the nutshell.
Okay.
So, Carl, I got a phone call from an investigator with the Department of Education. Why he called us, I'm not sure. But we had a long, lengthy conversation about that, and hearing specifically the same thing in the Houston area in particular, that students are coming to area universities and community colleges with a piece of paper that really is not valid. And how, as institutions, do we track those? How do we figure out what's real and what's not real? And my take was from the investigator that there is strong support from the Department of Ed to help. Did you have somebody there at your meeting?
Yes, the
from
meeting
Ed?
was with the Department of Education and the
Okay.
OIG.
Okay.
But I guess our concern, or we understood that there are these entities in existence and what the definition pretty much makes up, but that doesn't keep those students from enrolling, and they usually are economically needy students.
Mhm.
So again, they're waiting or going through the process until they get to their financial aid, and as we review their applications and find out it was from XYZ entity, knowing it's a diploma mill, then there's a lot of concern at that point.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Any other concerns from the community college or from the group that we feel like we need to be prepared to talk about? Yes, Mary.
One of the concerns. Hello?
You're on.
One of the concerns that we had for TSTC and Lamar colleges was the recent negotiated rulemaking for TEOG and the impact that it had on the funding for the both college systems. So that's one of the things that we'll be looking at, especially TSTC and Lamar. And it was, I believe, we had someone testify yesterday at the CAP meeting, both from Lamar and from TSTC. So we have a hold harmless for the next 2 years, but we really aren't sure what's going to happen after that. So that's going to be on our radar.
Okay. I'm familiar with the process of what happened with the TEOG negotiated rulemaking.
Well, the committee disbanded because it didn't come to consensus. And so the coordinating board had to put forward proposed rules, which were approved at the CAP meeting yesterday.
Okay.
Linda, did you? I'm not following you, but I'll.
No, at the last meeting we went. I think it was the last meeting. Meeting before last, we actually had some rules that there was some wording changes. I think you guys did.
Yeah, there were a number of minor changes throughout. That may be one of them. I'll be happy to share the.
I think that was in the context of the WGU study. Was that it?
Oh,
No.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there was some elements for the state to consider in creating a state-funded financial aid program for
the WGU.
WGU, and we did change that.
Yeah. But I do know that we did talk about the actual rules. We went over the TEOG, the TEG, and the Texas grant because we had some changes in language.
The TEG rule changes were on the consent calendar.
Okay.
And, I'll be happy to share with you.
Okay.
Could I mention one more bill?
Yes, ma'am.
Just to put on your radar, the universities. It's Senate Bill 117 by Van Taylor, and it requires students to be eligible for a Texas grant, either an initial award or renewal award, to be eligible for federal financial aid.
What?
That you basically have to demonstrate eligibility to
Oh, I
for
see where
federal
that's
financial
going.
aid, but
Yeah.
not require them to receive federal financial aid. So essentially,
Right. It's taking the undocumented,
Yes.
the HB 1403 out of the mix, right?
right.
Okay. And even for the renewal as well? Okay, we'll have to take a look at that.
You have to be a citizen.
Okay. All right. That is definitely something to check out. Any other thoughts, comments, questions on this topic? So I just think we need to be geared up and ready to go. Next month is when we'll start. For those of us that are looking at the bills, if something comes up that you feel like we need to have a conversation about, whether it's at our meeting in February or even via email, several of us we actually are required to go out and respond to bills. Please email me so that we can have a conversation about it. If we feel like we can be heard at a hearing on the topics that we have concerns about, I think it's important that we do that. We have a voice here, and then we'll also work with TASFA as well, because TASFA's been a great proponent at the hearings. I know I've spoken on behalf of TASFA as well as the advisory committee and UTSA. So there's an opportunity for us to do that and educate. Some of it's about educating the legislators on how we do business and what happens on our campuses, because a lot of times they just don't know. And so that's an opportunity for us to do that. So we'll definitely, I'm going to go back and get all the contacts that we have in a variety of offices to make sure that we can get on the agenda as well.
And I'd like to add that George Torres and Chris Muir were on a committee last year and are continuing on that committee, the legislative committee with TASFA, and had put together several position papers, one at the federal level, one at the state level. I think those were very helpful. I had mentioned to both Chris and George TASFA's willingness to hand deliver those and meet with legislators in Austin during this next legislative session, and encouraging schools from the TASFA membership to make those visits either with us or independently from us, so that we're handing that paper and being able to discuss that paper with our legislators. I did that in Washington, D.C. last March, and had some really great feedback from John Corden's office, from Ruben Hinojosa's office, and from Judge Ted Poe's office. And they were very well received, and really a big thank you to George and Chris, Dr. Muir, for working on those so diligently. They're great papers, and it really makes a difference that TASFA can say these things and have these positions and present those. So just want to say thank you, guys.
Okay.
Lisa, I do have another question. Yes. About the revised statutory provisions of Top 10 scholarship program. Can you elaborate on the recommendations that are going to be put forth for that? And the reason why I'm asking is because in the language currently, graduating seniors that are taking less than full-time enrollment, they cannot receive a top 10%. And that is something that we're wondering if we can change the language to allow them to receive the top 10% the semester that they're graduating. Is that, or, well, okay.
I'm not familiar with that. One of the disadvantages of course, Jane Caldwell having recently left, Lynn Kenyon's last day was yesterday, and so we have a void to fill here. I am not familiar with any legislative recommendation. Linda, yes?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
It is part of our legislative packet, and essentially we have been operating the top 10% scholarship program as it was created in a rider back in 2009. Subsequently, the legislature did pass legislation creating another top 10% statute, but that program was never funded. The program that we started via rules through the rider was funded. And so we never implemented the statutory program. And what we want to do now is get statutory authorization of the program that we currently administer. And so that way we can repeal what's in the statute now and essentially put what we have in rules into statute. I don't know about that specific provision that you're referencing, and I'm not sure. I haven't seen draft legislation. But one of the things that we are recommending is that it become an allocation methodology. And I think, obviously, we're going to have to go through negotiated rulemaking because so the legislation would essentially say the allocation methodology would be developed through negotiated rulemaking.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I like the allocation process on that. That sounds great. Hopefully we can get that through. Any other comments? We good? Any other? Okay, so if a particular topic you get back to your campuses or you're back to your offices and something is of concern, just email me. And then we'll, as we move forward, as we get into January, if anything crops up before our next meeting, I will get emails out to the group so that we can have that discussion if we need to and be prepared to talk in February. I imagine we'll have a lot more to talk about in February since the legislative session starts in January. So we'll have a few more things to discuss at that time. Okay?
Sure.
Yeah, the students.
The current higher education plan, Closing the Gaps by 2015, was adopted in October of 2000, and it will soon be time to adopt a new higher education plan for the next 15 years. So one of the strengths of Closing the Gaps by 2015 has been the contributions and strong support from the state's educational, business, and political communities. And I'm going to confess I've borrowed some words from our chair who spoke at a leadership conference just a few weeks ago. So to develop the same level of engagement and support that was achieved for Closing the Gaps, the board has established the Texas Higher Education Strategic Planning Committee. Members of the committee bring a wealth of experience and ideas from a variety of perspectives, including business, public education, and higher education. The tasks assigned to this committee are making recommendations for the goals, targets, and statewide strategies for the next long-term strategic plan for higher education in Texas. Number two, soliciting input from stakeholders and the general public across the state. So embedded within this framework are communications, meetings, and conferences like the one that was held a couple of weeks ago to invite, secure, and consider institutional and other stakeholder feedback on the potential goals and the prospective measurable targets associated with the next long-term plan. It's anticipated at the Coordinating Board's quarterly meeting on July 23, 2015, that the Strategic Planning Committee will present to the Board for consideration and adoption the committee's final recommendations regarding the next long-term strategic plan for higher education in Texas, and modified on the basis of input from stakeholders. To date, the Strategic Planning Committee has considered the following 4 goals for the next long-range higher education plan for Texas. Number 1, an overall state educational attainment goal. Number 2, a completion goal. 3, a marketable skills goal. And the 4th goal is a student debt goal. And that's why that item is on this agenda. Institutions are going to be invited throughout the coming months to provide input through subcommittees and during comment periods. And one thing I want you to pay special attention to, there's a handout I became aware of yesterday that there's a website for the Strategic Planning Committee. One of the handouts has the URL there and a copy of the cover page. And I think embedded in that there are other links, such as the one that links to, it's called College Town Hall, Texas, and I believe that's a way you can provide your input. There also is a copy of a couple of slides that were introduced at this leadership conference for discussion among the people who expressed interest in going to this particular session about student loan debt. And just in the last few days, I have received some really great articles from George. One of them is in your handouts, a paper that TG has written. Just yesterday, I learned of a very lengthy report that the State Comptroller's Office did on student loan debt with some recommendations. I haven't had a chance to read it all. I do have the high-level recommendations, but many of them are the same that we've been hearing and that are in the TG report. So really, this is your discussion to make recommendations for, what to do about student loan debt. I think one thing that I've seen over and over again is, of course, the importance of students enrolling for full-time, if at all possible, that definitely students that are enrolled part-time tend to take on a greater amount of student loan debt. But I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to lead any discussion on the topic.
Okay. And actually, I think because it looks like this is going to be a goal, right, in the strategic plan, we need to make sure that we're paying attention. And because along with the goal are going to come specific metrics that will need to be met. And then as institutions, we will need to help meet those objectives and be held accountable for those particular metrics. Does that make sense? So even if you look at the very first page of this, by 2030, undergraduate student loan debt will not exceed 60% of first-year wage for graduates of Texas public institutions. If we have a particular metric like that as part of the goal, and I'm just using that as an example, you can imagine that there's going to be some additional requirements that we are going to be required to do on our campuses to help the state achieve that goal. Just like we've had the same, if you think about what we've been going through with graduation rates and retention rates, that's all something that comes back to the institution. Okay, well, what are you doing to make your graduation rates and retention rates better, right? And all of our institutions are doing things like that. So now we need to look at, as we look at student loan debt, if reducing student loan debt is going to be something that's on the radar for the state of Texas, and there are statistics out there to show how much we're receiving from the federal government. If you look at what Lisa just mentioned about full-time versus part-time, we know that some students are going to be part-time and they're going to need to borrow student loans. So some of the things that have been talked about at the federal level is the flexibility of us helping determine how much a student can borrow. We don't have to give them the maximum. Right now, if there's enough room in their cost of attendance, we've got to offer them the maximum, and some students will choose to take out the maximum, whether they need it or not. So that presents the problem of additional student loan debt for those part-time students. They run out of their aggregate before they graduate because they're part-time and they're borrowing close to the maximum, right? Am I saying the right thing here? Okay, so that's something that, yes, it's great that we want to encourage full-time enrollment, but the reality is some students need to go part-time, but we have absolutely no leverage as an institution at the federal level to offer them less money. That's being talked about at the federal level, and whether, I know NASFA is presenting that as well, schools having that flexibility. So those are all things that are going on at all different kinds of levels, but we're going to be, as state, in the state of Texas, we're going to be helping to work on this, reducing the student loan debt. Reality is institutions will be the ones that will be doing the work. I'm just keeping it real, right? We all know that, right? So I'll open with that. Any thoughts?
Well, the revised goal is 72%.
Okay.
And that really is just what it currently is. So it's not, they're not even talking about lessening it or improving it. They're talking about freezing it at 72% and keeping it there for the next 15 years.
Okay.
But when I look at the possible strategies, a lot of it has to do with the legislature fully funding the Texas grant program or putting more money into this or redesigning higher education funding, and that's all great. That's fine. You want to put more money into college work study or Texas grants or TEG, that's great. But it's not a certainty. But and I agree that regardless how you feel about student debt, whether it's excessive or not excessive or a problem, not a problem, this committee has set that as a goal. And it would be good for this committee made up of experts to accept that and just make sure that when they develop the strategies for the report to be finalized in July, that they have things in there that make sense. In addition to advocating for more money for non-loan aid, that they have things in there. And number two, better advise students and parents on financial aid options and impacts before and during their college careers. Encourage financial planning to limit borrowing for their first semester. That's a good recommendation. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And a lot of that stuff is in the reports that Jeff Webster and his staff has done over the years at TG, because that's what we do. So I would just encourage the committee to go ahead and look at that, and TG stands ready to help out, just as we did with the pilot and with the Be On Time loan counseling. We certainly stand ready to lend whatever expertise and assistance we can to this committee. Because I think now that this committee is an official committee, it's in statute, and it's where the meetings are broadcast and it's open meetings, and I see this as a first opportunity for this advisory committee to really step up and advise this group that's writing the next 15-year plan for higher education for the state. It's a great opportunity to step in on something which is important both in Texas as well as nationally. And obviously, student debt is a big deal at the national level, as we all know. I think that's where they may have gotten their idea. The $1.2 trillion in outstanding debt. And while borrowing has gone down a little bit over the last few years, student debt has continued to increase. And there's a reason why the borrowing has gone down for the last couple of years. I don't think that's going to continue. But anyway, I just wanted to say that that's where we are here. 72% of the bachelor graduates. So they're not even talking about graduate debt here, which is a big deal.
Right.
That's another place where this committee can go to the planning committee and say, hey, you're leaving out a chunk here. Talk to us. Talk to TASFA. Talk to the advisory committee. But I think we're here to help out, and what TG has done under the research under Jeff's direction is out there on the website, and we're willing to help out in any way we can. Thanks,
George.
So George, I was at the College Board Forum in October, and was at an interesting presentation by Heather McDonald from Sarah Lawrence College, and she had pulled a lot of data showing nationally that student borrowing has really remained flat, that the increase is the number of students going to school, not that they're borrowing more to go to school. We just have more students in the system, which is exactly what we should be doing. I think when I looked at that data and went over that data several times, the College Board is pulling their data from students who fill out the profile. It's not all students across the country. It's just students who fill out their CSS profile. There's a cost to that. So upon reflection of that, because you and I had talked, I said, well, student borrowing's flat. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, it may not be flat among our lower income families. Those families who are not going to schools that use the CSS profile, because the profile is really used at schools that tend to offer more need-based aid. Usually private schools. So I think we really need to think long and hard about, as institutions, on how we're packaging our students. Are we packaging parent loans up front? Are we maximizing unsubsidized borrowing when maybe we shouldn't be doing that? I mean, if it's an unsub loan, that means there's not need there per se. Also helping schools figure out ways to manage their departments better so that they have more time for that loan counseling or that one-on-one, so that they can talk to those families about not borrowing excessively or what that borrowing means. And
private borrowing.
Pardon?
Or private.
Or private borrowing. And, it's easy for me to sit in my ivory tower at Rice because we only package $2,500 in subsidized loans. But we have to remember we always, as a country, always tend to look at the Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford models, and we only represent about 1% of the schools in the country. In Texas, we're the only school that does that. So we really need to look at the broader picture and figure out ways as a group to get that borrowing down. Financial literacy, those kinds of programs are, I would almost think would need to be required, but they now, for many schools, are having to pay for that, to have that for their students. So how do we cover the extra administrative burden, the extra costs that schools are having to incur to make sure that these students don't borrow? That's my concern, is how do we support, because it's kind of an unfunded mandate, right? We want you to do this, but we're not going to give you any money to help you do this. That's what we really need to be looking to our legislators for. We want to do this. We want to reduce borrowing, but if we don't have the financial means or the resources or the personnel, it becomes a very difficult proposition, and we'll set ourselves up to fail. So I think there needs to be some support from our legislators.
Well, yeah, I agree. And another part of this, and this is in the TASFA position paper, I believe, is that when the legislature decided to get involved in student loan default prevention, which it had not prior to last session, federal student loan default prevention, and established the pilot program, directed the coordinating board to do a pilot program with a very small number of schools, focused only on consumer information, nothing else. Just develop a program that will provide better information to students who are already in college, and which is good. And that's up and running. We're doing this with the coordinating board, and I see that as part of this issue of student debt, student loan default prevention, counseling, financial literacy, making sure people take out what they need, don't take out what they don't need, avail themselves of all the state and federal programs before they take out private loans. But I think that this committee should also look at that pilot program as something that, here's where we are at this point. You know what? This is a good idea. Student loan default prevention is a good idea. There's no question about it. Let's go ahead and expand this thing and put some money into it and include that as part of this long-term recommendation to try to cap what percentage of a borrower's income is devoted to paying back their student loan debt. It's an economic issue. And I think that I just think there's an opportunity here.
I spoke with Justin Drager also at one of several conferences I was at this last fall, and their hope, NASA's recommendation, is really, I think, in line, will help with this. They would like to see the default payment plan not be the standardized plan, but the default plan to be the income-based repayment plan, which is what they're highly recommending. I think, hey, listen, I have 2 college graduates who are trying to pay back their loans, and they're both doing income-based repayment. I'm not happy about it, but it's what they can afford. And I think we really need to look long and hard at that as part of the solution to help manage default. But I also think that the student ends up paying more in the long run with those programs, so it's a double-edged sword. I'm not super comfortable with that plan, but I think it is a good first step towards helping managing default.
Well, you're right under the current setup. I mean, the recommendation is a legislation that has been filed to essentially go to 2 repayment plans. I mean, they've got to go in and get rid of everything that's in there right now because some of those repayment plans are outdated. They're not used. They're FFEL. But the ones that have been filed fix that. I mean, they place a cap on interest rates. They place a cap on loan forgiveness based on income of the borrower. And that is something, quite honestly, that I think is going to happen sooner than later. I don't think they're going to do the income-based repayment changes for reauthorization. That can happen next year. That can happen during the budget process. But the proposals are to scrap the 7 repayment plans and replace it with 2. One income-based repayment that addresses those problems and a standard 10-year. And even with that, you still have defaults. under income-based repayment. But I think there's there's a role for somebody to play in the state to make sure that borrowers enroll in the program that's best for them and know how to switch from one to the other based on their income. So I think there is a lot to be done there, and I think income-based repayment will help if they make the improvements that need to be made. But I think that's coming. That's going to happen.
One of the things I have a strong concern about is interest rates. And I know at a state level, there's nothing we can do about interest rates on these federal loans. But when somebody can borrow for a home at 3% and their student debt is twice that, and I saw one of these slides that was talking about a student with debt, how many years will it take them to save to purchase their first home? This is a real issue, and I don't know that as a committee we can do anything, but one of my recommendations, and the Be on Time and the Cal loans are so popular at many institutions because those interest rates are significantly lower, and that benefits everybody. So, if we can just make sure that those state loans that are available to us stay competitive, because I would rather offer that to our students first before sending them down the private loan path.
Two comments. The UT system put together a task force to look at this issue about 3 or 4 years ago, and so there might be some value in talking to some people there. The other thing, though, that I'd like to suggest is even within I really like this goal, and I like this the attempt here, but even within this one pager that I'm looking at, it seems to me that there have already been some things that are being identified that we don't actually know if they work. So, for example, financial literacy. We don't know that the more financially literate students are, the less they borrow. At my institution, when we looked at issues of default at a place I worked at before, we found that the defaulters were defaulting on about $3,500 loan balances. The repayers were getting up over $10,000 and into the $20,000 and $30,000 and $40,000 range, because guess what? You acquire more debt as you persist in school, and it's the dropouts who default. But even though, I think nobody's been really looking very much up until now at challenging some of the fundamental assumptions about student borrowing and how students are impacted and why students are borrowing what they're borrowing. And I think there's a great opportunity here. And so, for example, with the COBORD and TG and the research resources that are available there, I think there's some fabulous things to look at, so we don't quickly glob on to solutions that sound good on the surface, but they're empty inside. So.
And Jeff, maybe you can help address this, but I would think there's data out there that supports the idea that of the first two goals that they mentioned was overall educational attainment, and the second one was completion, that with both of those goals being met, the student is going to be less likely to default and will be more likely to have a marketable skill and will be more likely to pay back their student debt. I would think that there's data that probably supports that. So what is good about this plan is that their priorities are lined up correctly, and that attainment and completion really need to be the top priorities, because that'll address the other two issues, having a marketable skill and addressing the student debt goal. Because I think when students complete, at least that's the case on our little cohort that we have at Rice, our completers pay back their loans. We have a 1 point something default rate because we have a 94% graduation rate, 6-year graduation rate. I know that's not the norm, but it is a good example of, I don't know if that's a causation or if that, you understand what I'm saying, or if that's really the truth.
Sure. Being able to complete your degree program is really the most effective thing that you can do to improve your chances of repayment. However, IHEP did a study a few years ago combining the largest guarantee agency data, including TGs. And one of the interesting findings from that was that if you looked at people who did get their degree, excuse me, those who did get their degree, from 5 years after they left school, 38% of those still became delinquent. So it's a real high number, even for the ones who've done everything and were successful. That is what prompted us to start looking at debt to income by major and trying to figure out what might be explanations for why some of those folks who did graduate weren't successful. We've subsequently are doing a study on loan counseling, looking at the federal department's tool, and where we've actually observed students going through that process. And for a variety of very interesting reasons, we're concluding that entrance and exit are minimally effective. For a variety of reasons, it's just not getting through. Part of it's design, part of it's statutory requirements to cover topics that are irrelevant to the student, and when they're confronted with that irrelevant information, they just turn off, and they aren't getting. So that puts that 38% in perspective, because that's a big chunk of people who graduated from their programs yet still are having trouble paying back their loans, even though there's lots of get out of jail options on these loans. So a lot of information is just not sinking into them.
We've been looking at ways to help our students be more financially literate. And we wanted to go to mandatory entrance counseling every year. And we were told last week at the Federal Student Aid Conference that we can't require it. If they've done it, we can't require them to do it every year. So, while these are great goals, when the federal government's saying what we can and can't do and what we have to offer students, regardless of what our cost is, because Collins tuition is one of the lowest in the nation, but we still have to offer full loans, freshman and sophomore levels, to all of our students, regardless. And we cannot try to do financial literacy with them to try to make things better on the back end. So even though this is a great goal, if our hands are tied in what we can do by the federal regulations, how are we going to ever make this an attainable goal?
Lisa, you brought up the idea was being batted around of maybe being able to limit the amount that they borrow based on the number of hours that they take or whatever metric that might be. When I was in Ruben Hinojosa's office last March and brought that up, I was immediately shot down. Because the idea is, well, we need to make as much money available to our low-income families as possible so that they go to school, so that they complete, and we don't want to limit what they can have access to. And anybody in here that's a financial aid administrator, you've approved, loans have gone through for spring break, for a new car, for things that, well, the car, they need transportation for school, but for things that are not direct educational costs, and you can't control what happens to that check once it leaves your institution. I think there needs to be some accountability on the student's part and on the family's part, and I don't know how to make that happen. I've told families who have fussed at us that we've not given them enough money that they can't afford rice, that Texas is a great state. We have a lot of great institutions that your kid will do well at. I mean, we need to really talk to families. Do you want to go $40,000 in debt per year getting this kid through school when there's a great option in San Antonio or Austin that they could go to? So I think there needs to be some responsibility on the family's end. And so I don't know how to legislate that, how to write that into rules, but families need to own part of this problem.
Comment. And another thing that I think I at least would like to see is something possible is targeting the non-completers, because it's like they come for one semester, they drop out, they've gotten a loan, you try to do the exit interview because they didn't do it when they left, but that's a huge volume right there, in my opinion. So part of the target is we need not just the completers, but what do we do with those students that didn't complete their education? How do we get them engaged in this process?
I think, well, I'm trying to digest what everybody just said, right? So, because I'm the only target when they're looking at the possible targets that I'm concerned about, and maybe it's just that I don't understand the work to limit debt so that no more than half the students who earn an undergraduate degree or certificate will have debt. I think that goes to the whole issue, and I'm going to talk to your issue about the limiting, us having the ability to limit how much they can borrow at the federal level. We are limited to what we can do, because it's not even if, okay, because I know part of the objectives is to increase funding, fully fund Texas grant program, fully fund all that. That covers their tuition and fees. At the current thing, we cover their tuition and fees. There's other expenses that the students have, and that cost of attendance is upwards of $20,000 to $23,000 at my institution, $20,000 to $22,000 for a student living on campus. If I'm first of all going to be required to cover a big chunk of that, and then half the students don't borrow. They may have enough grant funds and scholarship funds to cover their tuition and fees, but they can't afford to live on campus. And there's not enough work study dollars. So that's the only possible target that I would be a little bit concerned about, and is reducing the number of students that take out student loan debt, because that's where the responsibility, the whole concept of financial aid and the reason why there's a needs analysis that's done and that there's an expected family contribution is that parents and students do need to take on some of the burden of paying for school. How they choose to pay for that, whether it's through student loans, installment plans, or just outright cash or a check, right, is their choice. And then we have to provide resources for the students that don't have any means. If they have a zero expected family contribution, then we expect them, then they have an expectation, well, that means I don't have to pay anything. And maybe that is true for those lower income students. I think my concern was saying only half the students are going to have any debt. Well, if they only have to borrow a small amount each year, maybe, even $5,000 a year to cover their room, right? And it's more than that, but I'm just using that as an example, is not an unreasonable amount to borrow to get a bachelor's degree. But if we set a goal of only half our undergraduate students are going to borrow, but if some of them are only borrowing $10,000 or $11,000 a year, and you have a remote few that the media exploits that are borrowing $100,000 to get their bachelor's degree. We all know that happens. Those are the stories that are out there. Oh, student debt is an issue, and there's a lot of student debt out there, but a lot of the students, there's more students in the pipeline, and there's also a lot of students that borrow a reasonable amount of money to pay for those extra costs. They've received grants, they've received scholarships. Is it really unreasonable to expect that more than half of the students in Texas may borrow student loans? That's the target that concerns me the most. It's not, I understand about not letting them borrow more than what their wages, and Jeff has done a lot of research on that, looking at getting them to understand, listen, if you pursue this degree plan, it is a great degree plan, but you need to understand your income when you graduate is going to likely be in this range, so you really need to think about where you go to school and how much you borrow and come up with other resources. And just getting students to fill out essays on scholarship applications would be great, because there's probably more that could be eligible for scholarship money if they just write an essay. So those are all things that we can look at. That target is probably the one that concerns me the most, that I would probably have the biggest issue with the rest of the target, and I don't know, those numbers don't really make sense to me on currently 76,804 graduates. So I'm not sure what those numbers mean exactly, but that would really concern me at 50%, because then you're saying only 50% of the students should have to pay something for school. We're supposed to cover 100%. How in the world do we do that, especially if tuition set-asides go away at the public institutions? I mean, those are all things that are happening. These are great goals, but if we take away some of the resources that we have, where's that money going to come from? Those would be some of my thoughts initially.
And Lisa, just in reaction to that, the other thing I would caution on this, and again, understand I'm not at all opposed to this. I think this is a great goal to look at and try to implement. But your comments make me think about something. At our institution, only 50% of the students undergraduates graduate with debt. Guess who the 50% are that don't graduate with debt on the socioeconomic scale? So we have to be careful about what could, to the extent that we might implement public policies, we have to be careful that one of the byproducts might not be, for example, limiting access to higher education in order to blindly and slavishly adhere to the notion of, well, we don't want 50% of our state student body to be in debt. So, gee, those poor students just really, maybe we got to rethink those, because state resources are spread thin, and all those issues that are perennial issues. Now, again, I'm not saying anybody's sitting there saying this is a secret plan to, shut low-income students out of college or anything. I'm just saying that sometimes in the solutions to today's problem, you see, the problems of tomorrow, and we just have to make sure that there aren't some unintended consequences along those lines.
Well, remember, the heading on this one-pager is possible goals, targets.
Right, I guess if we're going to have a discussion about what's happening with this, because there's a committee meeting on this, we've had a discussion at TG, we've looked at some of these things. If we're going to have an opportunity to have an impact on what might come forth, I think we have to discuss what they're already talking about, right? And so if there's some concerns that we have about any of these I think we all would agree, and maybe I'm just speaking for everyone, but I think we would agree that reducing student loan debt in Texas is a really valuable goal, and we've all been working towards at our institutions, even with the limitations that we have, whether it be federal regulations or just the cost. And most students, I have a higher percentage than 50% that have to borrow at UTSA, and they're anywhere from the low income to the high income, because we have the whole, 46% of my undergraduates are Pell eligible. So that's the population that we serve. And I auto package student loans, and I have to look at, we have more students, when you guys were talking about how we auto package parent loans and things like that, we look at the fact that students get confused, and if we don't offer to them, they think they can't come. So our thought process is we offer it, and then we educate them on what they should or shouldn't do, and we're looking at ways that we can make sure students understand how they can pay for school, and that's all part of our graduation rate improvement plan. So we've got all these dynamics going on in our world, and financial aid administrators are actually now a big part of the enrollment process and graduation and retention. It's becoming more evident on a lot of our campuses that we do play. We've known it all along, but we play a very important role in that, and how we package aid is being refigured, and how we look at targeting our aid and things like that, so that we can improve all those rates is very important. And then we still have to figure out how we serve that needy student. I think having an expectation that a lot of students will need to borrow, it's just the amount that they borrow is probably more of concern to me than the number of students that are borrowing. How much of the total amount of aid that's going to students in the state of Texas, how much of it is in federal student loans, private student loans, and how do we go about reducing that so that it's reasonable and students are graduating with a reasonable amount of debt, knowing that you're going to have those outliers that are going to borrow that maximum because of all kinds of circumstances, like they lost their job and the only way they're going back to school, the only way they can live is if they borrow the maximum student loans. Those are independent students that need those extra loans to help live. So we have to remember those are going to be outliers, and what do we do with the mass? We have to look at rules and statute and legislation that meets the mass, not the extenuating circumstance. We can't create rules for the extenuating circumstance. We got to create rules for the majority of the students that go to our institutions. That's what we have to concentrate on as a committee, in my opinion.
I would like to address the state's role in this, in that the amount of funding that the state has provided for higher education has shrunk at a rate almost faster than the cost of education has gone up. The pie has shrunk, and the piece of the pie that each institution is now receiving has shrunk. And we as a state cannot be economically viable unless we have an educated workforce. We're one of the last in the country on the amount of aid we provide our students. I think the state needs to step up, our legislators need to step up and let go of some of that money. Provide better funding through, well, I would say TEG for us, but any of the other state grant programs, I think that will help reduce debt significantly. I am right there with Lisa. I think the head count is kind of goofy. Doing a head count as opposed to how much each borrower takes out. Most of our students will only borrow $10,000 at Rice, $2,500 per year, but 60% of our students borrow. It's an expensive education. And then the other thing I want to address is the idea of the needs analysis and how that's gotten really wonky and weird, because we've tried to simplify the FAFSA to allow more students to feel comfortable about filling that out, but it is a draconian measure. The EFCs that we're seeing are really, I look at them as a way to allocate Pell dollars. It's not a true picture of what a family can pay. We use the profile. The profile often gives us data on middle-income families with no assets whose EFCs are significantly lower than the federal EFC. And that's a problem. The federal EFC is a real issue. I know as a state there's not a whole lot we can do about that. But I think as a state we can look at how we come up with a needs analysis. And when the state is so hung up on an EFC with a family and that's how they're going to allocate dollars, when that EFC really is not a true measure of what a family can pay, that concerns me. That we might come up with a richer, more contextual way to understand a family's financial strength. I don't know if we can do that, but I think that will help with the debt burden that our students are taking on. It also helps inform our conversations with our students. So if you can't afford $25,000 a year out of the gate to go to one of our best public institutions, right? Let's start off at a community college, but then have the partnership, and I know a lot of community colleges do have great partnerships with our four-year schools, but have the state help support that goal. I just think the state has dropped the ball on what they provided as far as funding. We got up to, so in the last legislative session, they restored what they took away 4 years ago, right? So at that point in time, we had grown our population of students. So even though they restored the funding levels, it was still short because the number of students in the system had increased. So I think it's inherent upon us is to really get after the state on the grant aid that's available, because if there's more grant aid, students will borrow less. And I think that needs to be part of the strategy. Just saying.
May I also make a comment to that end?
Sure.
Also maybe revisit the renewal requirements for students. I know that at my shop it has been a challenge in the past that if a student had an initial grant and they returned for their second year, that they had some issues, or we had some issues finding eligible applicants because of the requirements for initial funding.
Are you speaking directly about the TEOG grant? Okay. Because I know that discussion came up about the Texas grant, but the one thing that I do remember in all those discussions, because the issue that we have with our grant funds is that because they are limited, right? We have a limited pot of money that we have to play with. We do have to set some kind of requirements so that students can still complete on time. And that's a lot of the discussions we've been having, even in some of the negotiated rulemaking for Texas Grant. And there is a merit component along with the need component for the Texas Grant. So the argument, because we pushed back a little bit, why can't we have the requirements be the same as the federal requirements, because it's confusing for satisfactory academic progress and all those things. But we did get, and I think it's because because they wanted that additional requirements, because there's limited funds and we want to give it to students that are going to be successful. And so I think the dynamic, we've got all these things, we got these need-based kids that we want to serve and we want to provide access to, but then we also have all these goals of getting students to complete, improving our graduation rates. You couple all that together with a limited pot of money. My concern is that we're going to set all these rules for what we need to do, and then there's not going to be any money to do it. And I do think actually some of the things that they're talking about strategies is fully funding those programs. So I think the goal that they have out here for the student loan debt is not, part of it does include how do we increase the grant funding. That's part of the possible strategies. Whether that at least it's there. The language is there saying, okay, you know what? If we're going to reduce the student loan debt, we're going to have to provide more resources. So that language is there in some of these drafts. So, okay, yeah, but I mean that is part of the discussion. So, Carl,
right. We just hate not being able to request all the funds that we've been allocated for that reason that I mentioned.
Okay, and we've had that happen before as well. Yeah, I understand that dilemma. I mean, that's what happened with the Be On Time, quite frankly, at our institution. And I do think the whole 15 hours is in there as well. I'm not sure, there's a lot of talk about that with 15 hours becoming the new full-time requirement. And, it's to me, that's another double-edged sword. I understand why, but I think the reality of our students now, they can't all take 15 hours. But on the other end, I'm also just like, it's only one more class. I mean, I look at that too. I'm just like, just take one more class a semester. You can do it, But getting them to understand that, we were able to increase that at UTSA this year. More than 60% of our freshmen are taking 15 hours their first semester because that was a big push. But making that the minimum requirement, there's a lot of ramifications for that at the state and federal level. But that is out there. That is part of the discussion. So we need to be prepared to talk about the impact that would have on our institutions if that were to become, this is it. Because that has been talked about even at I'm speaking for the Texas Grant, 15 hours would be the minimum, as opposed to 12 hours. Yes, sir.
And maybe it's a 2-year versus 4-year thing, because I know that 72% of our students are part-time.
Right. And that's the other dynamic that we have going on because of the population you serve. So how do we serve? We have got, so I think that's part of the educational process, that we need to make sure that the legislators understand the populations that we're all serving and the different needs that they have. We tend to try to create, everything is based on that traditional age student going full-time. And that's just not the reality at a lot of institutions. So how do we create programs that will meet the needs of all those programs? If we're going to look at redesigning the financial aid programs in the state of Texas to reduce student loan debt, we're going to have to look at all the populations that we serve. So providing that data would be important. Carolyn?
The other thing that we may want to look at is the academic side. Do they really need 120 hours for a degree? Do they need all those extra electives? Could they reduce the number of hours they need to maintain or to receive a degree?
I think every faculty member at every institution would tell you yes, right? Well, and 120, I mean, there's a lot of students taking more than that. I'd like to just get it down to 120 for bachelor's degrees. So, we've looked at our satisfactory academic progress. We've looked at our awarding philosophy, and, we're going to we are seriously looking at anything over 120 hours. There's not going to be as much financial aid available because we really feel like if you're going to graduate on time, you shouldn't exceed too much over the 120 hours. So, there's some benefit to a liberal arts education with electives, though. So, That would be my, as a liberal arts major, I would say that yes, those electives are important because I hear the dialogue about, I had a student that actually told me one time that because he was a STEM major, he felt like any extra grant money should go to him instead of the liberal arts major. And I said, you realize you're talking to a liberal arts major right now? That's probably, those are understanding the benefit of getting a liberal arts, a well-rounded education. To me, those electives are important because that made me a more well-rounded individual. So that's just my perspective on that. But I do think they are important.
And Lisa, I too was a liberal arts major, but obviously you should point out that, for example, liberal arts majors go on to chair highly prestigious state advisory committees, for example. So.
I can't play the piano here. That's what my bachelor's degree is in. So, yeah.
Could I ask a question? And again, I don't know to what extent the staff maybe has been involved in some discussions on this, but do you have any insight from the committee, sort of where they were coming from on this? Is it a concern about high indebtedness being a drag on the state's economy? Is it a concern about, or not so much that as high indebtedness being a drag on students who attend college and graduate from college, or being an impediment, or has a chilling effect on that, on students even going to college? All those things that you hear. I mean, does it? Sort of what's the thinking on this? Because again, as it's a great goal, but part of it is, okay, what are we trying to achieve this for?
What's our outcome?
Yeah. So,
thank you, Paul.
I've been quietly sitting out in the audience listening. And
this is Paul Turcott.
Oh, yes. My name is Paul Turcott. I'm a program director here at the coordinating board, and I've been helping to staff the committee for this plan. By the way, I'd just like to start out by saying I'm extremely excited with your interest in this. These are excellent comments, and I'm looking forward to more of them as we come closer to solidifying a plan. You hit on some key points that they are looking at all those things. They want to make sure, when you look at debt for Texas, we're doing quite well when you compare us to the nation. But that's not necessarily quite well for Texas. So they want to make sure that we continue to do quite well in the next 15 years. And that's why they picked 60% compared to wage and not just some other metric. They didn't want to say no student should have more than $20,000 in debt or so forth. It's an enormous burden. Debt can be very, very difficult, even with that metric, even if your debt level is 60% of your first year wage, depending on your situation and what your money has to go to. That can be a lot of debt to support, but we think we're there now, and if we can continue to push that into the future, that it would make the degrees more valuable, and it would also make it less of a drag on our economics. So, yes, you hit the points.
The answer is yes, yes, and yes for all those things.
Yeah. Paul, as you can tell by listening to us, we're financial aid directors, and so there's no wine we've never ever met and not liked. I'd be interested in your perspectives on what this committee might be able to do to help with this goal if it does become one of the goals. I mean, we've talked about various things here, just off the cuff, concerns about it, or positives about it. But do you see a role for this committee to play in trying to help actually implement or this goal or whatever?
Sure. So, listening to you from the audience, there is one thing that a couple of you started to hit on, but didn't quite say it. This goal will not be met from the financial aid office. Sure, you'll play a significant role, but there's more to it than just limiting what people are allowed to borrow. There's more to it than just limiting the number of loans they take out, or saying after so many hours you can't take any more loans. It's not really actually about limiting a student's debt. It's really about a cultural shift and getting them to think about spending tomorrow's money if you're not going to be making it back, if it's not a good investment. Higher education is always an investment, not just a financial one, but a societal one as well. And so the intent here with this goal is, yes, you will definitely help implement and meet a number of these targets, but you won't be the only ones. I have a son, he's going to college. We went to freshman orientation a couple of years ago. You have no idea the impact that what went on with the different folks that came out from the staff at the university had on him. As a 19-year-old, an 18-year-old, it's very difficult to make an impression. I know I've tried for so many decades and failed, and yet these folks, they've got him singing a song. He hasn't registered for one semester yet and considered taking less than 15 hours because they told him that that would be smart. And he went to college to be smart. So he's doing it. And some of that is culture. Some of the way you'll shape this is by sharing with those people that do those orientations what you should be thinking about when you're making that first adult commitment to sign a loan, how that's going to impact the rest of your life. And so one of the things, the second strategy that we have here isn't really just about every time they come to sign a loan, not letting them have the loan until they go through some kind of a program. It's about building a culture at your institution to think about debt. And I probably took too long to answer that question. I apologize. You're welcome.
I thought that was great. What I want, what I would hope and caution is that to remember that not every student is that 18-year-old going off to college. That the vast majority of the students in the state of Texas aren't coming from two-parent homes. They're not coming from the best school district. They're not coming from a well-resourced background. They may not buy into the Aggie song. I don't know if that's what you were talking about.
He's not there.
Okay. But yeah. But what I'm saying is we have to be very careful about the cultural differences in the state of Texas, and that most students in the state of Texas don't look like the kid that we all imagine goes off to college. Most of the students in the state of Texas come from low-income backgrounds. They're students of color. They're adult learners. They're displaced homemakers. They're out-of-work folks. I mean, most of the students in the state of Texas are not that 18-year-old kid that graduated from high school and is now going off to a university. That's not the norm. And so I want us to rethink how we're talking about, I mean, it's norm at Rice, but it's not the norm in Texas. And I want us to really rethink that when we go into this, because for so many years I've always heard, well, the kids this and the kids that, what they need in Texas, and that's just not the case here.
Question on the graph here with the wages. What's the source for the wage figure?
We are pulling that from the Texas Workforce Commission UI data.
Vary from area of the state to another area of the state? True
Yes.
or false? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. One of my favorite charts.
And just also remember that, you know, when you're talking about 15 credit hours, I mean, we've got 30,000 plus students enrolled in credit. Our average enrollment's 10 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of community colleges in Texas where you say you have to have 15 hours to get an award. It could impact whether those students can go or not.
Keep in mind, that is not a target. It's a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like another one of those songs that they sing at freshman orientation for those students that aren't maybe taking as many hours as they could. And I think we're going to change that to 30 per year instead of 15 per semester, but I don't know for sure. Some people have been saying 30 per year would make better sense so that students who want to take 10 semester credit hours per semester can do that the fall, spring, and then summer and still meet the 30 if they need to do that. But there's still going to be those students. They can only take one course per semester. As a strategy, it's not intended that everyone would be able to do that, but it's certainly better than them coming to school and go, well, I can get loans at 12, so I'll just take 12 and I'll graduate in 4 years, and that's impossible.
And I do think you're right. It's a culture shift on getting students to understand the difference between the 12 and the 15 hours. To meet that, you cannot mathematically graduate in 4 years only taking 12 hours in the fall and spring. It does not add. If you add that together, and I simple math, it does not compute. But making it for the full students that are going to be full-time, whether they're dependent, independent, traditional, I'm going to school full-time, getting that norm to 30 hours a year is something that could be a real strategy to go for, and making that the norm, knowing that you're still going to have part-time students that have to be served, and we have to figure out ways to do that as well. And the dilemma with the part-time, as far as reducing this, it would be interesting to see on the student loan debt what the population in Texas, and maybe we know this, looks like. Like how many of them are, how much are the part-time, that they're straight up part-time students, whether they're at the community college or even at the four-year institutions, they started part-time, they finished part-time, they took their time going through how much did they really borrow? How many of them did exceed and borrow the maximum every year and ran out of their aggregate? It would be interesting to see that, because that would help us determine how we can better serve the part-time students. And then it also, because we're right now, we don't have anything to help us limit the amount that they can borrow at the federal level, so that's going to impact the amount that they borrow, because we're talking about in the state of Texas reducing the student loan debt, but it's federal money we're talking about. Right. So we have these limitations on what we can and can't do, even though we're trying to help control it. And the only thing we can do is educate the students, but ultimately it is their choice, and they're going to do what they're going to do. So we can educate them until the cows come home, but if they're going to make that choice, no, I need that extra money, I have to live. And then they get to their junior year, and they've used up their aggregate limit as an undergraduate independent student, which is a pretty significant chunk of change to not have a bachelor's degree. And it happens. So it would be maybe we can look at some of that data to see, okay, what do our student borrowers look like in the state of Texas? How many of them are the traditional full-time students that only took 12 hours, and how much did they really borrow? How long did it take them to graduate? We have all these graduation rates. What do they really look like? I know that my kids graduating with 4 years are only borrowing $18,000 to $19,000, but the kids that are taking 6 years to graduate are more like $24,000, $25,000.
The FADs, the financial aid database that we all submit, that should absolutely have all of that data in it, statewide for every school. So some real data analysts could dig deep into that to see how many part-time students are, how long does it take this student back 6 years ago that went part-time, where are they at today, to go back and do some reflective study on that data. Could be some fascinating stuff out there.
I think we can calculate that for you. We can work on that.
And, our provost said something one time. We were talking about, because we're so focused on improving the 4-year graduation rate, the 5-year and the 6-year. And he goes, and then you see those outliers where it took them significantly longer to graduate. He goes, but those are still success stories. They graduated. So we have to remember that it's still a success story, that even if it takes them longer to graduate, they still graduated. They didn't drop out. There's something to be said for persistence, And so we just have to remember and try to get students through, because it does. I will tell you, and this happens at most campuses, I would imagine, students aren't concerned necessarily about, some of our current students have actually said, I don't care if I graduate in 4 years. And even if you throw it's going to cost you $10,000 more to live on campus for an extra year, they're just like, okay. So that they don't see the importance of, they want the experience. And so if it takes them longer to do that, they're okay with it, to the point where they're resisting our efforts. Our current freshmen coming in aren't necessarily resisting it, but the current students are just like, I only want to take 12 hours because I want to be involved. I want to do this. I have to work 30 hours a week in order to meet the way I want to live. And they're just like, I'm not concerned about graduating in 4 years. And even when you throw the dollar amount at them, it costs $10,000 or $11,000 more to go an extra year if you live on campus, and you're going to have to borrow that. Okay. They aren't thinking about that future ramification of that student loan debt. So that's the reality we're in.
The state of Texas could raise its minimum wage to $10 an hour, and that would solve a lot of problems. Just say it.
We can't solve that here, Ann. Yes, Chris.
Just a comment. I think the strategy is great to encourage students to take 15 hours a semester, and certainly we do that at Texas State too. But I know from the TASF position paper, one of the concerns we have is that such a strategy may be codified in statute or rule with respect to need-based grants. And I always have a concern of holding students who come from low socioeconomic conditions typically, who have high financial need and therefore may not be as prepared for that first or second semester of college, to really be holding them to a different standard where we expect needy students to enroll in 15 hours, but the rest of the students don't have that requirement.
Any other thoughts or discussion that you want to have about this particular topic?
Question.
Yes, sir.
Where do we go from here, Paul? What's sort of the timetable and the next steps and things like that?
Well, ultimately, the plan is supposed to be done in June. So each month, the committee will continue to meet. These meetings are broadcast, so you can listen in, and we'd appreciate it if you would, especially considering the expertise that you've brought to some of these things. We appreciate your input in helping to shape them. We meet every month, and we'll continue to shape these as the committee likes to come up with a plan.
Okay. Do they get the meeting information by going to this link on this webpage?
I'm not sure.
Connie?
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with that.
Mary Smith gave this to me yesterday.
Oh, yeah. So that's a very good question. If you're not on the list to get the meeting invite, at the end of every meeting they announce when the next meeting will be, and so that's a way to do that. But I don't know if Mary Smith can include this group on that distribution. That would be the best way to make sure that they knew about it.
I'll talk to her.
Okay, great.
Can I just make one suggestion that you might touch base with Jeff Webster, who's our researcher at Texas Guaranteed, because a lot of this material, a lot of this data, I don't think includes proprietary schools.
No, actually,
Private trade
this goal
schools.
is specifically for public institutions.
Right.
Yes.
But that is a significant.
Jeff doesn't know it yet, but he's been, well, he might know it. He's been a major resource for some of our research materials.
Okay.
We've relied on him quite a bit. Yes.
Well, that's. I would just, again, make the offer to work. Both of us can work together on this as we move forward.
We're happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Carl?
Just one comment. I think it's probably going to be interesting from the students' perspective, at least from my experience. Their mentality is that a loan isn't part of financial aid. Financial aid is only the grant money. And so their mindset is going to be, well, that's my loan. I'm going to pay it back, so you don't want to, you shouldn't touch it. So that's going to be, I guess, one of the interesting things if any of these topics get implemented.
Yeah, and I think we all understand. We've all heard that. Well, I didn't get any financial aid. Well, yes, you did it with student loans. That has been in existence forever. And I think the whole idea of this is that we need to figure out some better ways to educate our students, to make sure that they still have the choice to do what they're going to do. But if we can come up and maybe as a committee and as a state, working with TASFA, working with TG, we can really look at if we're, oh, hello, oh, okay. I'm not sure what just happened, but my seat just, okay, I'll be shorter for a minute. That was quite, sorry, for those of you that are listening, that I just sunk about a foot. So
we're taking a short break so
I'm
she
not
can
even
pump
sure
her
where
chair
I'm at
back
the
up.
moment. I think what we can do is, as these are being developed, we need to provide our feedback. So I think this will be a topic that we can talk about in our February meeting. So I would like for everyone to come back and we can continue this discussion. And we'll learn more as they continue to develop these targets and the strategies, and we can provide some real solid input knowing that the timeline is June. So we have an opportunity here. In the meantime, we can also start thinking about if these do become some of the targets and some of the strategies, what are we going to do on our campuses to help make this happen, to be a part of the educational process, to make sure that default management and financial literacy are a key component of what we do. And then my whole big thing is that we have to document what we're doing, because I think that's where we can educate the legislators, we can educate the people in the state of Texas about what we're doing on our. That has been happening for years, where they say, well, you need to do more outreach and you need to go out. We are, but are we documenting what we're doing? And so that would be another. And I'm not really sure where that would be collected, what would happen, but I do think it's very valuable for us as an industry in the state of Texas for us to document the work that we're doing. It's not to tout what we're doing, but I think it's a valuable educational tool for us to educate the legislators and the other folks around our own campuses. Likely some of our leadership on our campuses don't know all that we do for financial literacy and how we're trying to reach out to students. And then we can also figure out where the holes are. Maybe there's some holes that we don't know about either in our own communities or in the state of Texas where we need to figure out how could TASFA go in and fill the gap, right? I look at TACRO as an example. TACRO has the college fair circuit and they coordinate that. Well, why isn't TASFA coordinating something like that for a financial aid outreach kind of thing? What could we do to fill some of the gaps that are out there to help the state meet some of these objectives, or what the final objectives wind up being? So those are all things that we can have conversations about and what this group can come back with as we move forward. Fair enough? Okay, we only have one more agenda item. Is everybody okay if we just finish that up? And then we'll see if there's anything else and we'll move forward. Is everybody okay? All right. Lisa?
Well, actually, this will be very quick. You can go to our agency main webpage and find the link to the new org chart. I think probably from your perspective, the main, and I think something that's going to be very interesting change that you'll see is we now have a new sort of, I don't know if you call it department, but it's a work group. There are going to be 3 positions, very senior level positions, one of which Ginger Gossman stood up earlier. I was hoping that you would get to meet her. I hope you did meet her before the meeting. She's the senior director of the Innovation and Policy Development Group. And the idea is that these people won't have the kind of day-to-day work that the rest of us have, and we'll be able to actually focus on, doing research, looking at trends for any policy question that comes up. And I would anticipate that this group will be very interested in working with this committee in the future for any policies that come up with regard to state financial aid. I think 2 of the positions have yet to be filled, but Ginger is leading that group. And in the state financial aid programs, we used to be called the Student Services Division. We are currently in the process of we're going through the hiring process. It really hasn't begun yet for the deputy assistant commissioner for state financial aid programs. And as I mentioned, we lost Lynn Kenyon to Baylor University. Her last day here at the office was yesterday. We're going to miss her. Her position, or the director of grants and special programs position, was also posted and has closed, and applications are being referred to the panel. So that's where we are on the reorganization. I think it would be a better use of your time if you're curious about the entire org chart, just to go to our website and take a look. The idea is to better align the agency's organization with the goals and strategies that we've been talking about. So that's really all I have on that. If Linda were here, she might have something more eloquent to say about it.
Anybody have any questions? Awesome. Okay, so the only other thing that we need to decide is when we're going to meet. February is the next month, right, guys? Okay, so in looking at, because of what we talked about earlier, we need to get that recommendation process. The idea is that we need to get no, never mind, that's September. Don't mind me. We need to figure out a date to meet. In fact, that whole reduction of my seat just threw me off. So we need to figure out a week, a day to meet in February. Do we normally meet like the first week? We normally meet the first or second week. Is it? I thought it's February, right? Yeah.
And
first week of February.
Yeah.
NASA has their meeting February 3rd.
Okay.
The first week of February.
Okay.
Hopefully February 5th. But I haven't gotten commitments yet.
Okay.
And may I make a suggestion?
Yes.
I see Rissa back there. It seems like at one of our advisory meetings, she suggested that we use something called, is it Doodle?
It's Doodle poll.
Doodle?
It's a Doodle poll.
To poll people, as opposed to, in the past, all these back and forth emails and everything. Since
Okay,
we don't
we
have
can do that.
many.
We can do Doodle poll. I can do Doodle poll if you want to do that.
It's just a thought.
No, that's fine. Would that work for everybody? If we that way you can get back to your campuses. So what I'd like for you to do is look at your calendars for the first couple weeks of February. Let's try to keep February 5th out of the mix. We typically either meet on a Tuesday or Thursday. That's normally, so if those days of the week work, especially for the new committee members, make sure that you kind of take a look at that. And I will get a Doodle poll out to see when you can meet. Is that fair enough? Yes. That way you can go ahead and, because I know we'll do that. Well, let's see. A lot of campuses are closing. We probably need to decide that like next week. So I'm probably going to send out a Doodle. Somebody's going to send out a Doodle poll. It might be Connie or it might be me, right? And we'll send something out to look at the possible dates. So please get back to your campuses. Look at those first couple. Yes, sir. Lucky you. One of the benefits, right? Okay, we will do our best to get the. Have you guys ever done it? Can we get a Doodle poll out tomorrow?
Yeah. Sure.
We will do our best to get a Doodle poll out tomorrow, and then everybody will need to respond by Tuesday so that we can get the date set, because if you do have to make airline ticket reservations, we want you to be able to do that. Yes, ma'am.
What are the normal months of meetings, because I know
It's February and July, and right?
It's been like in March and June.
I don't remember coming in March. Okay, I thought it was February. Okay, do we want to do March? Tom's ringing. March? Well, the session's going to be going on. We can't really avoid that, regardless of when we decide to meet. So, would March be a better time frame? I don't remember, to tell you the truth, when I was here. I've been here a lot.
First week of March is the NASFA Leadership Symposium.
Yeah.
I'd recommend we try to shoot for February. I'm not opposed to going a little bit later in the month in the first couple weeks, but
Okay. And in light of the legislative session, if we can do February, how about February, June, September, December? Is that fair enough? And we'll just shoot for maybe a little bit later in February. Okay. That good? That work for everybody?
Yep.
All right. So we'll send out a Doodle poll just as quickly as we can. And even if it's Monday, we might ask you to respond within like a day, by Tuesday, so we can set a date. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, can I get a motion? Are there any other topics that we need to talk about while we're here? Can I get a motion to adjourn then?
So moved.
Second? We have a motion and we have a second. Everyone in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to leaving? All right, then we are adjourned. Thank you so much for your participation today, and we'll see you next time.
Well done. I could see the look of
It was.